My daughter-in-law called me on a Thursday afternoon while I was watering the roses. Her voice had that bright, rehearsed cheerfulness people use when they're about to tell you something they hope you won't notice. "Dad," she said, "we sold the lake house last week. We figured you'd be happy for us. We finally have enough for the new place in Charleston." I stood there with the hose running over my shoes and didn't say anything for a long moment. The lake house. My lake house. The one I deeded over to my son 18 months ago so he could manage the property taxes more efficiently. The one where my late wife Carol had planted every single one of the hydrangeas that lined the porch. I said, "That's wonderful, Bethany. Congratulations." I hung up, walked into the garage, sat down at my workbench, and opened the laptop I keep for exactly this kind of moment. Before I go any further, let me know where you're watching from tonight, friend. And if you've ever had family try to take something from you while smiling the whole time, hit that like button for me. I'm Walter Ashcroft. I'm 68 years old, and for 35 years I ran an industrial fabrication company out of a two-bay shop in Toledo, Ohio, the kind of business that builds the machines other companies use to build everything else. I never went to college. I learned to read blueprints before I learned to drive. I built that company with my hands and my head, and I built it clean. Every contract, every welded seam, every dollar accounted for. I understood risk the way most men understand breathing. You don't see the danger until it's already inside the walls. My son Bradley is 41. He runs what he calls a wealth consulting firm, which as far as I can tell mostly consists of him wearing expensive watches and talking about other people's money. His wife Bethany came into the family 6 years ago with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, and an uncanny gift for knowing exactly what to say to make me feel useful again after Carol passed. 2 years ago they sat right there in my den, Bradley's arm around Bethany's shoulders, and told me they wanted to be closer to me in my golden years. They said the lake house, the one 2 hours north where Carol and I spent every summer for 3 decades, needed a new dock and a full septic overhaul, and the contractors up there were bleeding them dry. I wrote a check for $480,000. I signed the deed transfer myself, in my own hand, because I trusted my son the way I trusted gravity. Now Bethany was on the phone telling me, almost as an afterthought, that they'd sold it. Not renovated it. Sold it. And they weren't asking my permission. They were informing me, the way you'd inform a tenant that his lease wasn't being renewed. I did not raise my voice. I did not slam my fist on the workbench like some man in a movie. I am a man who spent his whole life reading the fine print on other people's contracts. When a machine starts making a sound it shouldn't make, you don't panic, you shut it down, and you find the fault. I closed the garage door, walked into the house, and went straight to the fireproof filing cabinet in my study, the one bolted to the floor since 1994. I needed the original deed paperwork. I needed to see, in black and white, exactly what I'd signed, and what I hadn't. The cabinet was locked, as always. I keep the only key on a chain around my neck, day and night. A habit from decades of guarding blueprints, worth more than most people's houses. I unlocked it and pulled the drawer marked, "Real Estate Permanent." My hand met the familiar tab for the lake house folder. I pulled it out. It was empty. Not misfiled. Not thin. Completely, deliberately empty. The deed transfer copy, the original survey, the insurance riders, all of it, gone. A cold feeling spread through my chest, the kind I hadn't felt since the morning the bank called about a forged signature on a supplier invoice 30 years ago. Someone had been in this cabinet. Someone who knew exactly what to take and exactly how to leave, no trace of having been there. My mind went back 3 weeks, to a Tuesday when Bethany had shown up unannounced with a casserole dish and a story about wanting to surprise me by organizing my study while I finished a phone call with my accountant in the kitchen. She'd been in that room alone for nearly 40 minutes. I remembered thinking at the time how strange it was that a woman who'd never once offered to help me with paperwork suddenly wanted to alphabetize my files. She must have watched me use that key before she'd been in this house for 6 years, after all, and found her moment to make a copy or simply lift the original when my back was turned. I don't know how she opened the cabinet itself. I would find that out later. But she had gotten inside it, and she had taken exactly what she needed to make sure I had no proof of what I'd actually agreed to. My phone buzzed in my pocket while I stood there staring at the empty folder. It was a text from my bank's fraud monitoring service. Security notice. A request has been submitted to update the mailing address on your primary investment account to a residence in Charleston, South Carolina. If you did not authorize this change, contact us immediately. I read it twice. They weren't just walking away with a piece of property I'd given them in good faith. They were trying to reroute my entire financial life, quietly, patiently, address by address, account by account, while I was 3 states away watering flowers that used to be my wife's. I sat down at my desk. My son thought he was dealing with a tired old widower who wouldn't notice a few missing papers and a change of address form. He forgot something important about his old man. Before I built machines, I spent 11 years as an internal auditor for 2 different manufacturing conglomerates, tracking exactly this kind of quiet, patient theft, the kind that doesn't announce itself with a broken window, but with a missing signature and a rerouted check. I closed my eyes for exactly 10 seconds. Then I opened my laptop and began to work. I want to be clear about something, because I know how this must sound. I did not go looking for a reason to distrust my son. I spent the better part of a year making excuses for things that, looking back now, I should have questioned immediately. It started about 8 months ago, not long after I had a small stroke scare that turned out to be nothing more than a bad reaction to a new blood pressure medication. Bethany insisted on managing my prescriptions after that. Said it was the least she could do. Said Bradley was too busy with his firm's biggest quarter yet to handle it himself. She started bringing over a weekly pill organizer, already filled, sealed with a little sticker that said, "Love B." I never questioned it. Why would I question the woman who was pregnant with my first grandchild? But the weeks that followed were strange in a way I couldn't name at the time. I, a man who could recall a supplier's contract terms from a decade earlier without looking them up, started forgetting where I'd parked in my own driveway. I would walk into the kitchen and stand there, blank, no memory of what I'd come for. My hands would tremble slightly in the evenings. My words would come out slower, softer around the edges, like my tongue had gone lazy. I thought it was age. I thought it was grief, finally catching up to me, 3 years after Carol's passing. Bethany was always there when it happened, always with her phone conveniently raised. "Oh, Walter, you're just so funny when you're tired," she'd laugh, tapping the screen. "I'm just getting this for Bradley. He worries about you so much." It wasn't affection. It was documentation. She was building a file, quietly, patiently, the same way I used to build a case against a dishonest vendor. Except this time, I was the vendor. The fog finally lifted the day I found the empty folder in my study, and something in my chest went from confused to furious in the space of about 4 seconds. I got up, walked out to the garage, and did something I hadn't done in years. I went looking through the trash. Bradley and Bethany had been helping me declutter the guest room the week before, hauling out 3 contractor bags they said were full of old magazines and expired coupons. Those bags were still sitting by the curb, waiting for Thursday pickup. I tore into the first one with my bare hands, not caring about the smell or the mess, ignoring the neighbor across the street who slowed his car to stare at a 68-year-old man in slacks digging through garbage in broad daylight. Near the bottom of the second bag, wedged between a broken picture frame and a stack of junk mail, I found it. A small foil blister pack. No pharmacy label, no dosage chart, just a plain string of letters and numbers stamped in black ink on the back. 7 slots, 6 of them empty. I carried it inside with hands that weren't quite steady, though this time it wasn't the drug, it was rage, cold and building. I sat down at my desk, opened a browser, and searched that alphanumeric code against an online pharmaceutical database I'd used years ago during a supply chain fraud investigation for the company. What came back wasn't a vitamin. It wasn't a memory supplement. It was a controlled sedative, the kind prescribed only under strict psychiatric supervision, the kind that produces exactly the symptoms I'd been living with for 2 months. Slurred speech, memory lapses, tremors, a slow, convincing counterfeit of dementia. My own daughter-in-law had been drugging me at my own kitchen table, and my son had been sitting across from me every single Sunday dinner, watching it happen, saying nothing. I sat in that chair for a long time. I am not a man who cries easily, and I didn't cry then either. What I felt instead was something harder and more useful. I thought about every year I spent teaching Bradley how a business runs, how you protect an asset, how you spot a weakness before someone else exploits it, how you never, ever let sentiment blind you to a threat sitting right across the table. He had learned those lessons well. He was simply using them against the man who taught them to him. I needed proof of what had actually happened in this house, not just what I suspected. I have a modest security system, cameras at the front door and the garage, nothing elaborate, installed years ago after a rash of break-ins in the neighborhood. I logged into the app on my phone and pulled up the footage from the week Bethany had organized my study. The screen froze. A window popped open in the center of my monitor, black background, white text scrolling faster than I could read it. Then a single line appeared and stayed there. Archive corrupted. Deletion complete. Someone had wiped my own security footage remotely, and they'd done it with more sophistication than I would have credited either of them with. I sat back in my chair, and for the first time that night, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. Bradley had learned a great deal from me about protecting an asset. What he had forgotten, or perhaps never fully understood, was that I don't build anything, a machine, a company, a house, with only one layer of protection. Long before I retired, back when I was still consulting on security systems for manufacturing plants worried about industrial espionage, I had a second, independent recording system installed in this house. It wasn't connected to the same network. It wasn't accessible from any app on any phone. It ran on its own hardwired loop, feeding into a small server in the crawlspace beneath my study, a space Bradley didn't know existed because I'd had it built the same summer he left for college and never once mentioned it since. I walked down to the study, pulled up the loose floorboard behind my bookshelf, and connected a cable to the hidden terminal. The footage loaded, clean and untouched. I scrolled back to the exact day and hour of Bethany's visit. There she was, casserole dish set aside on the hallway table, moving straight to the filing cabinet with a small tension wrench and pick set, working the lock with the calm, practiced patience of someone who had clearly done this kind of thing before, or at least studied how. She had my folder open and photographed within 6 minutes. She was gone from the room in under 20. I kept watching. 3 nights later, at nearly 1 in the morning, the same hidden camera caught both of them in my study together. Bradley standing watch by the door while Bethany fed documents through a small portable scanner. I turned up the audio. "Are you sure about this?" Bradley's voice said. Quiet, uncertain, the voice of a boy asking permission rather than a man committing a crime. "Once we submit the new deed and the guardianship paperwork, there's no walking it back." Bethany didn't even look up from the scanner. "Bradley. He's a sweet old man who can barely remember his own address most nights. The sedative's doing exactly what we need it to do. By the time anyone checks, we'll have the house, the accounts, and full medical authority. He won't even understand what happened to him. Guardianship." The word sat in my chest like a stone dropped down a well. They weren't simply stealing property out from under a confused old man. They were building a legal case to have me declared incompetent, to take away my right to make decisions about my own life, my own money, my own body. And once that happened, there would be no lake house sale to argue about, because there would be no me left with any authority to argue at all. I did not call the police that night. I want to explain why, because I know some of you watching this will think I should have. I have spent 35 years learning that the loudest reaction is rarely the smartest one. If I called the police with nothing but a suspicion and a foil pack of pills, Bradley's lawyers, and believe me, wealth consultants always have lawyers, would spin it into a confused, grieving father lashing out at the children trying to help him. I needed more. I needed the whole architecture of what they were building, not just the foundation. I picked up my phone and called the one number I keep for exactly this kind of situation, a retired federal investigator named Marcus Reyes, who used to help me vet suppliers overseas back when counterfeit parts were flooding into our industry and costing companies millions. Marcus doesn't do this work publicly anymore. He does it for people he trusts, quietly, for cash, off any official record. He answered on the second ring, the way he always does, like he's been waiting for exactly this kind of call his whole retirement. I told him everything, the missing folder, the pills, the 2 videos, the guardianship comment. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said the words that confirmed what I already suspected in my gut. "Walter, if they're already talking about guardianship paperwork, they've been planning this for months, not weeks. I need 48 hours and full access to whatever financial accounts you're willing to give me eyes on." I gave him everything. I trust very few people completely in this world. Marcus Reyes has earned that trust 20 times over. He called back the next evening, and his voice had none of its usual calm. "Walter," he said, "they didn't just list the lake house. Using a medical power of attorney they must have forged, likely with your actual signature copied from an old document. They took out a $2.2 million home equity loan against your primary residence 3 days ago. The funds transferred into an LLC registered under Bethany's maiden name. Charleston property records show that same LLC just closed on a $900,000 house on the water cash purchase 2 days ago. I sat with the phone against my ear in the silence of my own kitchen, the kitchen where Bethany had handed me poison disguised as care for 2 straight months, and I felt something inside me that I can only describe as the sensation of a machine finally, fully, completely understood. This was not a family disagreement. This was a coordinated theft, executed against a man they had chemically disabled to make sure he couldn't fight back. And they had done it in my house, at my table, with my own trust as their primary tool. My phone buzzed again almost the instant I hung up with Marcus. A video call, Bradley's name on the screen. I took 3 slow breaths, the way I used to before walking into a room to fire a man who'd been stealing from the shop floor. I let my shoulders slump. I let my eyes go soft and unfocused. I answered. "Hey, Dad," Bradley said. "Entirely too bright, entirely too easy." Bethany sat beside him on their couch, one hand resting on her rounded stomach, smiling at me like nothing in the world was wrong. "We wanted to check on you. How are you feeling today? Did you take your morning pills?" I let my mouth hang open just slightly, blinked slower than usual, let my voice come out thin and confused. I think so, son. I've been having trouble finding things around the house lately. I can't remember where I put my checkbook. I looked all morning." Bethany's eyes flicked toward Bradley for one brief second, a look of pure, quiet satisfaction passing between them, gone almost before it registered. She genuinely believed it was working. She believed I was somewhere in this house, drugged and lost, searching for a checkbook while they'd already stolen $2.5 million out from under me. "Don't you worry about any of that, Dad," Bradley said, using the exact tone you'd use to soothe a frightened child. "I've got everything handled. All your bills are automatic now. You just focus on resting." "You are such a good son," I told him, and I meant every syllable of contempt buried inside those words, though he could never have heard it. "We'll come see you soon," Bethany added sweetly. I told them I loved them. I hung up. I stopped slouching before the screen had even gone dark. Marcus called back within the hour with something that changed the entire shape of what I was dealing with. The $900,000 Charleston house wasn't simply a new home. It bordered a marina development that Bradley's firm had quietly been trying to get into for over a year. A development being led, as it turned out, by a man named Preston Hale, who happened to be the same competitor who'd tried and failed twice to buy my old fabrication company out from under me a decade earlier, back when I still ran it before selling to my longtime operations manager. Bradley wasn't just stealing my money to live comfortably. He was funneling it directly into a business partnership with the one man who had spent years trying to take my life's work away from me by other means. My own son had crawled into bed, financially speaking, with my oldest enemy. I did not shout. I did not throw anything. I sat very still and let that particular betrayal settle into its proper place alongside all the others. And then I asked Marcus one simple question. "What do I need to stop this before it becomes permanent?" He explained it to me clearly, the way you'd explain a fault line in a bridge to the one engineer who could actually fix it. The equity loan money was still sitting in an escrow-adjacent holding account, waiting for a final transfer authorization tied to the closing of Bradley's new marina partnership deal, scheduled for 3 nights from now at a celebration dinner Preston Hale was hosting at his estate outside Charleston. If the transfer completed, the money would scatter into a dozen accounts across 2 states and become nearly impossible to claw back without years of litigation. If it didn't complete, it stayed frozen, traceable, and recoverable. What Bradley didn't know, what he had no possible way of knowing, was that 30 years ago, when I first started accumulating real wealth from the company, I set up something with my original attorney that I never once mentioned to my son, because at the time there was no reason to think I'd ever need it against my own family. Any transfer request against my core holdings exceeding $1 million requires a live voice authorization matched against a recorded biometric passphrase on file with my trust administrator, a safeguard I built after watching 2 separate business partners get fleeced by embezzling relatives decades ago. Bradley's forged power of attorney could open doors. It could not open that one. I told Marcus to let it ride. Let them walk all the way to that closing dinner, believing they'd already won. The next 2 days moved slowly, the particular slowness of a man waiting to spring a trap he built with his own hands. I flew to Charleston on a Thursday afternoon, quiet, alone, telling no one. Marcus met me at a small private airfield outside the city with a rental car and a folder of everything he'd gathered, the forged documents, the escrow trail, sworn statements he'd already begun collecting from a bank compliance officer who'd noticed irregularities in the loan paperwork and was more than willing to talk. Once Marcus explained what was really happening to an elderly man, 3 states away. We parked half a block down from Preston Hale's sprawling waterfront estate the night of the celebration dinner, watching valets in white jackets pull luxury cars through the gate one after another. Through the tall windows I could see Bradley moving through the crowd with a champagne flute in his hand, laughing too loudly, shaking hands too eagerly, playing the part of a self-made man financed entirely by a theft he thought no one would ever trace back to him. Bethany stood near the door in a pale blue dress, glowing with the particular confidence of a woman who believes she has already gotten away with everything. Marcus had a directional microphone trained on the dining room windows, the same kind he used to use listening in on shipping fraud negotiations years ago. Preston Hale's voice came through first, warm and expansive. "To the newest partner in the Ashford Cove development," he announced, "and to leaving the old guard fully behind us." Bradley's voice, thick with pride, "To the future." I sat in that dark car and listened to my son toast his own father's ruin with the man who had spent a decade trying to destroy everything I built, and I felt nothing shift in me except a deepening, settling calm. I heard the moment the final transaction request went through on Bradley's laptop, heard him tell the room the funds were clearing, heard the clink of another round of champagne, and then I heard the silence that followed 30 seconds later, when the authorization request slammed into a wall it could never get past without my voice, my passphrase, my permission. Bradley's confident tone cracked mid-sentence. There's some kind of delay," he stammered. Preston Hale's warmth vanished instantly, replaced by the flat, suspicious tone of a man who does not tolerate embarrassment at his own table. "You told me this was finalized, Bradley." That was the moment I opened the car door. "I want you to understand something about how I walked up that driveway. I was not wearing the cardigan and slippers I'd worn on that video call. I had on the same charcoal suit I used to wear into board meetings when a company was trying to buy mine out from under me, and I intended to make sure they left with nothing. I walked past the valet stand, past the startled catering staff, straight through the front door, and into that dining room full of Charleston's wealthiest strangers, all of whom had spent the last hour listening to Bethany's carefully rehearsed story about her poor, confused father-in-law fading away back in Ohio. The room went quiet the way rooms do when something has entered them that doesn't belong to the evening's script. Bradley turned first. I watched every ounce of blood drain out of his face in real time. Bethany's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble floor, and the sound of it seemed to echo far longer than it should have. "Dad," Bradley said, his voice climbing toward panic. How are you even—" "You forgot to tell me you sold the lake house, son," I said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, my voice perfectly level. "And it seems you forgot something else, too. I'm the one who built the security around every account you just tried to empty." I turned to Preston Hale, who was staring at me with the particular horror of a man realizing he has just publicly financed a crime. "I'd get your own lawyers on the phone tonight, Preston," I said. "Every dollar my son just brought to this partnership was stolen from me under a forged medical authorization, and the loan is already flagged with the State Attorney General's Financial Crimes Unit." That last part wasn't entirely true yet. It would be true within the hour. Marcus was already on the phone in the driveway, making certain of it. Bradley lunged toward me, not violently, but desperately, the way a drowning man reaches for anything solid. "Dad, please, we can explain. This isn't what it looks like." Bethany, for her part, said nothing at all. She simply stood very still near the shattered glass, watching her carefully built performance collapse in front of the exact audience she'd built it for. I didn't stay for the rest of it. I had already done what I came to do. Within 6 weeks, the State Financial Crimes Division had built a complete case around the forged power of attorney, the fraudulent loan, and the sedative Bethany had been administering, which her own physician once confronted with bank records showing an unexplained $40,000 payment from her account, admitted to prescribing off the books in exchange for money he badly needed to cover. Gambling debts. He lost his medical license. Bethany was charged with elder financial exploitation and fraud. Bradley, facing his own charges for the forged authorization and the fraudulent loan, took a plea deal that spared him significant prison time but left him with a felony record, a revoked business license, and a restitution order that will follow him for the next 15 years. I did not attend the sentencing. I sent Marcus in my place to confirm the restitution terms were airtight, and I spent that morning instead sitting in my own kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd been poisoned for 2 months, drinking coffee in the quiet. I want to say something plainly, because I know some of you listening tonight have lived through your own version of this. I did not disown my son out of anger. I removed him from every account, every trust document, every future claim on anything I've built, because love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just an open door for anyone willing to walk through it. I have set aside a separate, fully protected trust for my grandchild, administered entirely outside my son's reach, meant to cover education and nothing else, so that whatever mistakes his parents made will never become a debt the child has to pay. That was the only mercy I had left to give, and I gave it fully. The lake house is gone. I've made my peace with that. Carol's hydrangeas are someone else's now, and I hope whoever tends them loves them the way she did. But my company, my name, and what's left of my family's good conduct are entirely my own again, protected the same way I protected every machine I ever built, with more than one line of defense, and the patience to let a trap finish closing before you ever raise your voice. If there's one thing I'd ask you to carry away from tonight, it's this. Trust is not the same thing as blindness. The people who truly love you will never ask you to stop paying attention. Watch your accounts. Keep a second set of eyes on anything you can't verify yourself. And never, ever, let anyone convince you that questioning them is the same thing as betraying them. If this story meant something to you tonight, hit that like button. And if you've ever had to protect yourself from someone who was supposed to protect you, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Stay steady, friends. Stay sharp. And take care of each other the real way.